The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There are 14 female Democratic senators in the U.S. Senate. 13 of those 14 have already endorsed Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton for president. One female Democratic senator has not endorsed Hillary Clinton. Her name is Elizabeth Warren. Hillary Clinton now boasts endorsements from 38 of the 46 Senate Democratic members, which is about 83% of that caucus, according to The Chase, U.S. News's political tracker. Senator Bernie Sanders, the Vermont independent who caucuses with Democrats, has not yet landed a single endorsement from a colleague. No Republican candidate has more than 3 Senate endorsements. But at issue today, and what I want to discuss with you, is that Elizabeth Warren has not endorsed anybody yet. And this is interesting for a number of reasons. Number one, of course, we have the gender element, and many making a lot out of the idea that Elizabeth Warren, although a woman like Hillary Clinton, actually has much more in common politically with Bernie Sanders. And I don't think there's any doubt about that, Lewis. There's no question that on politics, Senator Warren is far closer to Bernie Sanders than she is to Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I think that much of what Warren, if you look at what she's been lobbying against, the big banks, Wall Street, we know Hillary's connections there, and clearly they don't jive. And I don't think we're going to hear that endorsement, but she hasn't endorsed Bernie either, right?
No, and asked about Elizabeth Warren, a Bernie Sanders campaign spokesman named Michael Briggs said, quote, "He's known her and admired her since she was a mere Harvard professor. They speak all the time." And Senator Warren has sort of danced around questions of endorsing Bernie Sanders or endorsing anybody. She publicly has been very positive about Bernie Sanders, fighting for what she believes in, as Lewis talked about, many issues related to big business and banking and minimum wage, et cetera. But she has also avoided any direct criticism of Hillary Clinton. Does this matter as far as impact? Probably not. Endorsements are of unclear value. An endorsement from one senator is likely not to make a very big difference at all, even if that senator is Elizabeth Warren, who is seen as one of the top progressives today. But it is very interesting because it continues on what is sort of speculated to be a tenuous relationship between Elizabeth Warren and the Clintons. The Clintons have, by every estimate, viewed Elizabeth Warren as a sort of political threat for a long time. Former President Bill Clinton reportedly declined to campaign for Elizabeth Warren's Senate race in 2012. And the bigger issue is, of course, the conversation around why this is a story for some. And for many, and this is kind of sad to me, the big story here is, well, why wouldn't a female senator who's a Democrat endorse Hillary Clinton, who is a female Democrat running for office? And I think the answer is that it's about much more than just gender, right? It's clearly about political issues. And there's this caricature of, oh, women just want to vote for someone based on their gender if it's a woman, which was disproven with regard to African Americans voting for Barack Obama because he's black. There was Herman Cain. We now see Ben Carson, and there is no rush from Democrats to support someone. There is no rush from black voters to support a candidate merely because they are black. So I actually think the gender story is not the right story through which to analyze this.
No, but it's sad that there are those groups. We saw this last election cycle. The groups of women, probably numbering in the thousands, maybe tens of thousands, who were only supporting Hillary because she was a woman, voting because she would, right?
You're saying they exist.
They exist.
There are
Right?
people who will support any candidate for identity politics reasons. They may support the evangelical Christian candidate as opposed to the Catholic or Baptist because that is their religion, or they may support Bernie Sanders because Bernie Sanders is Jewish, for example. That exists. But I think the idea that the identity politics alone are going to propel someone to victory, that is what seems to be increasingly harder and harder to believe.
I don't think that's going to be the case. Your gender is not going to win you an election, but Dave, it will, in Hillary's case, get you thousands and thousands of votes. Just based on that.
Maybe not, according to some, as many as Bernie Sanders is getting from at least female donors. But we'll talk about that story probably more tomorrow. Let's talk a little bit about a very ironic story from Fox News. Fox News host Andrea Tantaros is angry because she says after the Planned Parenthood shooting, liberals were indicting an entire religion because the guy who committed the shooting at Planned Parenthood happened to be a white, middle-aged, right-wing Christian terrorist. This is so funny, and I'm going to play the clip for you. And of course, what's ironic about this, and Charles Payne gets pulled into this on the show, and you have Andrea Tantaros, and then you have, I believe, Dana Perino got wrapped up, or maybe it was Harris Faulkner. I may be misspeaking. Just listen to this, and then we'll discuss the obvious irony and absurdity of it.
So is it? I mean, I think this was pretty predictable, Charles. You saw on Twitter a lot of people rushing to judgment. Yeah. The same people that hesitate using the phrase Islamic terrorism were very quick to use the term Christian.
Right.
You're absolutely right. In fact, Harris and I both, we covered this live on Friday. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you had to walk a very thin line, obviously. And, you know, you knew Planned Parenthood was there, but there were other businesses there. You kind of figured it was centered on this. And as soon as that was the case, you know, people were tweeting me the definitions of terrorism and those kind of things. But, you know, when I listened to what Hillary said, from what I understand, people have an opposition, particularly some of the politicians, Republican politicians running for the White House, to the idea of taxpayers funding Planned Parenthood and abortion. They're not saying, hey, listen, the courts have ruled, perhaps they'll rule again in the future. They're not saying, and you don't have to like abortion, but they're saying there's no way in the world that taxpayer money should be used for that, particularly when they're talking about selling baby parts.
Pause it there real quick, Louis. Just pause. Charles Payne is still talking about baby parts. This is the type of rhetoric that the terrorist who committed the Planned Parenthood shooting mentioned after his arrest, right? And Charles Payne is still talking about the fake baby parts videos. Just think about that, and then let's listen to the rest of what they said.
They're talking about selling baby parts. And that's neither one, Bernie Sanders or Hillary, those clips we saw, both very disingenuous. And that's what stokes these flames of hatred and anger.
And it was quite the leap, too, as you point out, to talk about a shooting and then link that somehow to women not being able to get abortions. Harris, you were on this story from the minute it broke in the Fox News desk, and you stayed with me. I know you stayed with Charles. I was filling in for Greta Van Susteren, and when you and I were doing the news, they got the guy. But at the same time, I'm waiting to go on air. But Paris, they were not releasing information, and yet people had already jumped to conclusions, and they were indicting an entire religion, Christian, white, Republican, before we even got details.
Okay.
You know, and then you had the
indicting an entire religion the way you on Fox and your friends do every time there is a Muslim terror incident, asking random Muslims with no connection not only to the incident, but maybe not even to the country that the perpetrators were from, to state whether they denounce the terror or not. The irony here is absolutely astounding, and they won't see it, Louis, right? They won't see on Fox that they're upset that at what they see of a branding of white Christian terrorists, right-wing Christian terrorists. They're upset about that while they jump on board demanding random Muslims denounce acts of terror doing the exact same thing.
They are very quick to do that, but they also think that liberals, of course, they put liberals all in the same category as well,
right?
Have this inability to say Islamic terrorist, radical Islamic terrorist, because, okay, maybe Obama hasn't said it. Maybe, I don't know if he said it or
he
not.
has.
I believe he has, but I certainly have no problem saying that. You have no problem saying that.
Absolutely. And I know that there are some on what's increasingly being described as the regressive left who want to remove any responsibility whatsoever of terror from the terrorists. And we don't do that on this program, but you're absolutely right, Louis. Many on the left do. And remember, these are the same xenophobes who have been screaming about keeping all the Muslims out of the U.S., all the Muslim refugees out, and only accepting Christian refugees. They are the one branding entire religions as A, B, or C, good, bad, whatever, and they will never see it because they are in this echo chamber of just nonsense, this apoplexy of lunacy that exists on Fox News. And hey, we're not going to be able to convince them otherwise.
No, probably not, Dave. They would have to, I suppose, befriend some Muslims and I don't
Well,
know.
as Donald Trump has said, some of his best friends are Muslim or Hispanic or whatever the case may be. That's a really great way, actually, to sort of distance yourself from criticism. Say, hey, some of my best friends fall into this category.
Yeah, Donald Trump best friend is a female Mexican Muslim. Right. It's ridiculous. I think what Fox News needs, Dave, is they need a Muslim host. They need a Muslim anchor, and that way they can have some. They can say, look who we have on our show. We're not xenophobe.
And if you can get that Muslim host on Fox News to denounce all Muslims, I mean, even better, right? Then you're really, it's a home run. It's a total home run. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump retweeted an image recently which purportedly gave crime statistics broken down by race. Now, unfortunately, the numbers were completely inaccurate. Bill O'Reilly pointed this out during a recent interview with Donald Trump. The source of this image that Donald Trump retweeted, and I say retweeted as opposed to tweeted, and that's a key part of the story, at least if you listen to what Donald Trump is going to say in the clip I'll play. The statistics came from something called the Crime Statistics Bureau. According to PolitiFact, that doesn't even exist. Didn't matter to Donald Trump, apparently. Bill O'Reilly confronts Donald Trump, and Donald Trump says, hey, I retweeted it, and what can you really expect? I mean, I have all these things I'm retweeting. I don't take any responsibility at all for what they are. Let's take a listen.
The least racist person on earth.
Well, I've known you a long time, and
I
I never saw any racism from you. However, when you tweet out a thing, and this bothered me, I got to tell you, you tweeted out that whites killed by blacks, these were statistics you picked up from somewhere, at a rate of 81%. And that's totally wrong. Whites killed by blacks is 15%. Yet you tweeted it was 81%.
Right.
Now,
Bill, I didn't tweet. I retweeted somebody that was supposedly an expert.
But you don't
and it was also a radio show.
Why do you want to be in that
zone?
zone?
Hey, Bill, am I going to check every statistic? I've got millions and millions of people.
You got it. You're a presidential contender. You got to check it.
I have millions of people. You know what? Fine. But this came out of radio shows and everything else.
Oh, come on.
All
Radio
it was
shows?
A retweet. I didn't say. Excuse me. All it was is a retweet. It wasn't from me, and it did. It came out of a radio show and other places because you see all the names.
Look, you know I'm looking out for you, right? You know that? Yeah, I'm looking out for you. I look out for every honest politician. I don't care what party they're in. Don't do this.
Okay, let's stop
Don't put your name on.
I like that Bill O'Reilly's criticism is spot on, but he says he looks out for every honest politician. I don't know that there's a candidate right now who just lies more than Donald Trump does. I mean, Donald Trump just makes stuff up. And I love how he says he has millions of people, just like Mitt Romney has binders full of women, apparently.
Yeah, millions of people. I don't know. I don't know about that. He makes up his own statistics and he spreads his own statistics. I think that Donald, I mean, honest, Dave, is he honest because he always says what is on his mind and what he's thinking? That's a form of honesty.
Sure.
But if he truly believes the things he's saying, although they happen to be false, are you still an honest person?
Right. Is it a lie if you thought it was true and or convinced yourself that it was true for the purposes of political advancement because you think you would improve the country if you were to win? We're really using a very fast and loose definition of honesty here. I also like how Trump says, hey, listen, I didn't verify it, but it came from very credible sources that PolitiFact claims don't exist. The credible sources Trump refers to do not exist, according to PolitiFact.
Yeah, I mean, we've reached a point where, Dave, when you see those little infographics on Facebook or Twitter, you immediately, the first thing you think is, okay, this is probably just made up nonsense.
The first thing I think of is, what is the source? Does it say the source along the bottom? And if so, I look at that source or try to find it anyway.
So much of it is totally fabricated, and you really need to know better. I mean, if he were to become president, would he still be this sloppy with his social media and all of that? I don't think so. It's just, and I saw people retweet, repost that same graphic on Facebook.
Absolutely. Eating it up like it was being spoon-fed to them because it was. That's exactly the idea. Make it really easy for people to spread totally bogus misinformation. It's Tuesday. We are basically 11 months to the day from our next presidential election. We will take a break and be back with more after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program depends on the support of you in our audience, and today's new member of the day is Jared Martin. Jared, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join Jared, get the bonus show, get the commercial-free audio feed, get the commercial-free video feed, get invited to a quarterly town hall meeting with Lewis and with me, so many other great benefits. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up, and remember, you can pick up David Pakman Show gear like Lewis's brand new, it looks like a green shirt, but it's not. That's called Pistachio. That is a pistachio colored shirt. Go to davidpakman.com/gear, and please send in your pictures of you wearing your David Pakman Show apparel. We need more pictures for our website, particularly women wearing the t-shirts, because we get a lot of pictures from men, and we want to spruce up the website with some pictures of women in the t-shirt. That's quite a t-shirt, Lewis, I must say.
It's very bright. Far brighter than anything I'm used to wearing, and I'm sure the listeners know that.
Yeah, no, I think it's good for you, for sure. Okay, let's talk about the 2016 Hatriot Mail calendar, which I have right here. Last year, we did a 2015 Hatriot Mail calendar, and we shipped 122 calendars. The goal this year was to ship 200 of these calendars, and I'm pleased to report that during November, we got 111 of them out. So we have only 89 calendars to go. If you want to get just this calendar, and Lewis, you put this thing up. I mean, there's a picture of me vomiting the gay pride flag in here that was designed by a member of our audience. If you put this thing up at your cubicle or your office at work, talk about a conversation piece. This is a conversation piece. You can get the calendar at davidpakman.com/calendar16. It's extraordinary. Lewis, you've purchased like 1,000 of them, right? They're just back ordered because we have to fill the audience orders first.
Yes, I don't even know where I'm going to put them once I get them, but perhaps I'll give them to charity.
Well, you can give one to each person that you've gifted a membership to, because you have like 2.3 billion memberships at this point you've handed out. If you want just the calendar, davidpakman.com/calendar16. If you want the calendar for free, you can go to davidpakman.com/calendar16 and get a membership, and you will get the calendar for free. This is super easy. We will probably have to cut off sales around the middle of December so that we can make sure that everybody can get theirs printed and delivered by January 1st. So davidpakman.com/calendar16. Exciting stuff. Very, very exciting. Let's talk a little bit, Lewis, if I may, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One of the most popular talking points on the anti-Israeli side is the Palestinians want peace, the Israelis don't want peace. And with every passing month, we get more information telling us that this tired old talking point really is not true. Now, usually it's related to Hamas. We know that Hamas is a terrorist organization. We know that Hamas absolutely does not want peace. But there's often the idea that the Palestinian Authority, led by Mahmoud Abbas, that is in control of the West Bank, does want peace. Well, we now have, for the first time, and this may have slipped past you because maybe you don't get this type of news from the media outlets you frequent, for example. I don't know why. But the Palestinian Authority president, Mahmoud Abbas, has publicly confirmed for the first time that he indeed turned down a peace offer back in 2008, which would have provided for an independent Palestinian state. That state would have contained the Gaza Strip, all of it, and much of the West Bank, with the exception of some land swaps, and I'll talk about that in a second, and a tunnel connecting the two areas. And Mahmoud Abbas made these comments in an interview on Israel's Channel 10 recently, which has been broadcasting a pretty good three-part series on the peace talks of 2000 and 2008. And according to both Mahmoud Abbas and Ehud Olmert, Israel's prime minister at the time of these negotiations in 2008, Olmert presented Abbas in September of that year with a map that delineated the borders of the future state of Palestine, and Abbas admits that he rejected it out of hand because he claimed not to be an expert on maps, and because Olmert's domestic scandals meant he would shortly leave office and make it unclear whether it would have been a deal that could ultimately happen or not. So Olmert and other Palestinian leaders have previously said that Abbas turned down a peace proposal, but we never had specific confirmation from the Palestinian Authority. This to me is very, very important, Lewis. It's particularly important because this is a deal that would have met many of the key requirements to what I see as a reasonable peace deal. Number one, of course, there has to be a truly independent country politically. Palestine has to be an independent country. The land swaps to make up for areas that are Israeli settlements that can't be realistically broken down, this is absolutely necessary. There are just some pieces of the West Bank that, unfortunately, and I'm against the settlements, are now so settled by Israelis that you are not going to reasonably be able to break those down in a peace agreement. So land swaps are going to need to happen, meaningful land swaps, and Yasser Arafat was okay with this back when he was alive and involved in peace negotiations. And the other key is some kind of continuity or contiguity between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and the tunnel between the two areas that was part of this proposal would certainly be a part of that. So the talking point that Palestinians want peace and Israelis don't is nonsense. There are individuals on both sides who have an interest in maintaining a state of war. And of course, there are individuals on both sides that want peace, but we've got to do away with this talking point, Lewis, that Israel's the bad guy who doesn't want peace. Netanyahu may not benefit from peace. Netanyahu specifically may not have much of an impetus to do a very good peace agreement at this point, but we've got to stop with those talking points that are getting us nowhere.
Yeah, we can do without Netanyahu. We can also do without Hamas. That's going to be probably a bit more difficult to achieve on the Palestinian side.
Yes.
Ultimately, Netanyahu will no longer be in politics, but Hamas may be here for quite some time.
Last month, a Texas mother found her child's newly approved geography book referring to African slaves shipped to plantations in the United States during the 1500s and the 1600s, not as slaves, but rather as workers. The Texas Board of Education rejected a measure a few days ago which would require university experts to fact check the state's textbooks in public schools. The board rejected the measure 8-7, and they said, hey, having our citizens and, parents and whoever wants to get involved fact check our books, that's good enough. We don't need no academic consultation here to figure out what should be in our books. Marty Rowley, a Republican board member from Amarillo, Texas, said, quote, I think we're making it stronger and better and more expert than in the past. Now, not everybody agrees. Ellen Rockmore, who's a writing professor at Dartmouth College, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times last month saying, this entire writing of these Texas textbooks is basically written to favor slave owners, downplay how bad slavery was, and downplay the horrors of the situation of slave ownership. Academics, obviously, Lewis, are criticizing this. Yeah, slavery, what's that? I remember that in the 1500s, workers came over from Africa and American plantation owners were nice enough to give them jobs. Unpaid jobs that they couldn't leave, of course.
Yeah, and you could probably have book after book, textbook after textbook after textbook of the horrible things that were just done to slaves after they got here. It was crazy, Dave. I mean, do you think that through this type of
revisionist history,
through textbooks, is it possible that at some point in the future, people might start referring to the slaves that were brought over as workers?
I really hope not, because that would truly be an atrocity. And we have to remember, history is typically written by the winners or the survivors or those who made it out alive. Call it what you want. Our entire perspective on Christopher Columbus and the colonization of the United States by the Pilgrims and their successors, the followers, are written in a way that, by and large, more of an effort is being made now to recognize that there was a total wiping out of the native populations, a combination of violent killings and through the disease that was brought to the West or to the Americas from Europe. But it's written in a way that, of course, downplays the negative impact. Of course, now we all live here and it's all great in America and the whole thing. But we have to remember that when we talk about Thanksgiving, when we talk about Columbus Day, a lot of that history is lost. And we have to keep that in mind. And I hope that we are now not putting slavery up on the chopping block as something else that will be completely whitewashed. When we went to school, Louis, we learned what I still think is a pretty accurate and sensitive and realistic history of slavery in the United States.
Yes, agreed. But not so much when it comes to the Native American situation.
Right.
I think that was a little bit whitewashed. And so, unfortunately, we have businesses, big businesses, writing these books.
Right.
And does it make sense for them to financially to write a book that would be accurate and fair in our eyes? Are they going to lose money on that? Will it be adopted by schools and universities?
Well, we've heard the reason that Texas has so much power with regard to these big publishers and the revisionism that they've been going through. Texas individually is one of the bigger textbook markets in the country because it is one of the bigger states, and many publishers don't want to then create different versions for smaller states, etc. It's a sort of a simplistic explanation, but to Lewis's point, money is probably a factor here, not in why parents in Texas want garbage like this in textbooks, but as to why then the textbooks can start to pervade public schools.
Yeah. And so it might be interesting to speak to someone who works for one of these publishers.
Yeah.
But that also may be difficult.
I assume that they are probably not doing too many interviews. I don't know why anyone would want to distort the unbiased factual history of the United States of Jesus Christ under biblical law, as this country was really called before liberals said, well, we're going to call it the United States of America. Why would anyone want to retell history in that way? I don't know. Remember that I am on Twitter at @dpacman. Louis is on Twitter at @LouisMoComedy. It's a fantastic program today, probably the best in at least a couple of days.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I told you back in October of 2014 that only one breeding male white rhino was left on Earth, and that just a total of 6 northern white rhinos at all remained at the time. And now, December 1st of 2015, we are down to just 3 northern white rhinos remaining. There were a series of illnesses for one of the last northern white rhinos on the planet, and unfortunately, that rhino died just a few days ago. This was Nola, a 41-year-old female who lived at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park since arriving in the late 80s from what is now the Czech Republic. The 3 remaining northern white rhinos all live in Kenya, where they're watched 24 hours a day by armed guards. And of the 3 remaining northern white rhinos, there are 2 females and 1 male. The bull rhino, named Sudan, is 42 years old, too advanced in age to reproduce sexually. I hesitate to even call it good news, but the possible silver lining is that sperm samples have been collected and are currently stored in liquid nitrogen in the Czech Republic, and there are plans to do in vitro fertilization, where eggs from a female northern white rhino fertilized with the sperm cells from the now 42-year-old Sudan will be implanted into a surrogate, and it will be a southern white rhino, which is a related species living in the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. And, this is one of those situations, Louis, where the climate skeptic right likes to say about extinctions, listen, animals come into existence, they go out of existence all the time, God works in mysterious ways, whatever. Even if humans weren't here, animals would be going in and out of existence. That may be true. There is sort of what we call a baseline level of animal extinction, but numerous scientific studies have made it clear now that that rate currently has been accelerated, and it has been accelerated by human activities on Earth. And the northern white rhino is an example of that. There is absolutely no scientific evidence whatsoever that this has been a sort of natural extinction, just the process of the cyclical Earth that we live on, not the case whatsoever. And it is very, very sad.
Yeah, we discussed on a bonus show a while ago that according to some scientists and the rate of different extinctions happening, that we are entering a mass extinction period. And so, yeah, and don't forget, rhinos were one of the most hunted creatures.
Absolutely.
Apart from what we're doing to the environment and all of that, the hunting, Dave, the poaching has been completely out of control.
Now, some people have said, David, you're sort of playing semantics by saying, well, the northern white rhino is almost extinct, but the southern one isn't because they're basically the same animal. It's true that genetically, the northern and southern white rhinos are very, very similar. There are a few RNA markers that can tell them apart in a lab, but the distinction geographically is actually even more interesting because we then can say with even more certitude that actually this is a result of human activities on Earth, because the genetically similar animals are not all dying out. The southern white rhino, which at one point was down to only 20 left, has had a resurgence in population, but that is because it is located elsewhere geographically, and there has been a very deliberate effort to restore that population. So for those who write in and say, David, you're being deceptive. The northern white rhino is the same thing as the southern, and altogether now there are thousands of them. No. The reality of the northern and southern white rhinos actually are more evidence that this is a human-caused thing.
Yeah, and of course they are genetically different. I mean, if that doesn't matter to you, then, whatever. You probably don't feel bad about the poaching. You probably don't feel bad when they'll go extinct. You probably didn't feel bad about the Galapagos tortoises or whatever.
You probably would eat white rhino in that case.
Maybe. Ew.
Is eating rhino meat even a thing? I've never heard of it.
I'm sure you probably can. I would hope that if you were to kill one, you would at least eat it.
Right.
Right?
Hopefully you're not just killing it for sport, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
I like this idea. There's this new campaign in Brazil, which is plastering billboards with racist Facebook comments. The campaign is called Virtual Racism, Real Consequences. And what they do is when you post to Facebook, sometimes if you have your location tag on, you are sending a bit of data which says where you are posting from. And what the campaign has done is try to figure out where the offenders live, and then they buy billboard space in the neighborhood, and then they put up the racist or offensive Facebook posts that people have put up. Now, they are blurring the names and photos of the commenters, so the idea, I guess, is just that the commenter would recognize, hey, that's my comment, that's my blurred picture, but ideally other people wouldn't necessarily know who it is. And the picture we're showing here translates from Portuguese to say, I got home stinking of black people, using a term for black people that is derogatory, than more offensive than just black people. And I just love this idea, Lewis, because we recently did an interview about online bullying and online harassment. And one of the key traits of online harassment and online bullying is that you're protected and insulated to a certain degree. And that is, for some people who would not be in-person bullies, what sort of encourages or at least creates an environment where they're comfortable posting really heinous stuff online that they probably have the common sense not to say in person. This says, hey, you posted this to Facebook. To some degree, that is public, at least if you have your settings so that people can see what you post, even if they're not friends with you. Let's really blow it up and see if you're just as comfortable with what you're posting online being posted in your neighborhood. And I love this. And of course, I don't think that this should lead to any violence against these individuals. I never condone that. But I like the idea of saying, hey, what you're saying should be seen by more people. Let's explore whether you still stand behind it.
Yeah, it's. I think it's an interesting campaign, but my question is, could it have the opposite effect? If someone says a racist comment, xenophobic comment, certainly some people will see the billboard and think to themselves,
great comment.
That's wonderful. I agree. And the person who sees it themselves, if you see your own comment on a billboard, you might think, look, I'm famous. I'm gonna keep posting this stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think maybe when you first see it, you would think that if you're one of these really disconnected racists or xenophobes or whatever, where you don't even realize what the impact of your words is. I would love to put some of the stuff I see posted on Facebook or better yet on Twitter on a huge billboard right outside the person's home saying, with a big arrow, the person who lives here posted this. I don't think the U.S. has enough billboard space to expose all of the social media racists that we have in this country.
No, but you know what? I'm really thankful for social media because as a result of people, using it, we have seen countless politicians, law enforcement officers, city officials and other people be fired, or at least
be
we're
publicly
made aware,
embarrassed.
We're embarrassed. We're made aware of the fact that
Yeah.
they might be extremely racist or hateful or xenophobic, and so many people are still going to be kind of busted, if you will, or caught up, regardless of having their name thrown on a big billboard. But I do think it's an interesting campaign.
In the future, with augmented reality, we will probably be able to, when someone walks around, if you have the right, Google Glass equivalent on, or even just holding up your phone, you will be able to see as a cloud around people all of the offensive things that they've posted online. I mean, imagine that you run a small business and someone walks in, oh, hey, nice to meet you. And with augmented reality technology, you see, oh, this person was just online calling Jews kikes and gay bashing, or whatever the case may be. Technology may really expose a lot of these individuals.
It has, and it will continue to expose them even more so. Look, if you're going to do this stuff online, be smart about it. Make sure you're doing it completely anonymously.
As the online world and the offline world become increasingly not indistinguishable, but I guess we can say united, people are going to have to think of their online activities as real world activities. Of course, you will still be able to maintain anonymity online, and there will still be ways to do that to a certain extent. But people are going to have some kind of paradigm shift with the idea that, hey, what I do online has consequences in the real world, and many people, fortunately, already know that. Let's take a break. I have more stories for you, including a story about animal cloning. We have your voicemails and so much more.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's been a long time since we talked about cloning, and a lot of the world still sort of hasn't figured out how they feel about eating cloned meat from cloned animals, nor have the ethics and safety of animal cloning really been thoroughly researched. But China is moving full speed ahead and building the world's biggest animal cloning factory, which is reportedly set to open next year. This is not a 5 or 10 years in the future type of thing. The factory will cost $31 million. It'll be located in a government-sponsored business area about 100 miles from Beijing. And the feelings are mixed about this, about whether we should be eating cloned meat or not. I mean, on the one hand, we have the European Parliament, which recently voted by a pretty large margin to totally outlaw the sale of cloned livestock. On the other hand, the FDA has said there are no complications that are unique to cloning. In other words, cloned meat carries all the same risks as non-cloned meat, but there is nothing additional in terms of risk presented by eating cloned meat, and that the meat is totally safe to eat, in spite of the fact that we do know so far cloned animals tend not to live as long as those birthed in the, what do we call it, the old-fashioned way, the God-given way. And in the U.S., people may not know this, but special labeling isn't even required for cloned meat. And it's not even clear how common the practice of cloning meat for food is in the U.S. today. Some say that most of the cattle cloned in the U.S. are used not to be, not butchered and sold for food, but rather used to breed more animals. The new facility in China is going to focus on cloning cattle to feed China's rapidly growing population, which really, really likes meat. A company called Boya Life, which is involved with this factory, will be cloning champion racehorses and dogs used to sniff out victims of natural disasters, for example, or to be drug-sniffing dogs, etc. What do you think about this, Lewis? Where are you on cloned meat right now, as someone who is trying to minimize meat consumption as it is?
Yeah, well, maybe it's going to be better for carbon emissions, and ultimately, I don't know. Imagine if instead of through, we want a lot of meat, we need a lot of meat, we have our ways of doing that.
Right.
We have the cows, we feed them who knows what, they're given growth hormones, they're, all of the stuff we're giving these animals ends up in us. Imagine if from the start, we somehow managed to meet our needs through genetic modification and cloning. would we be in a better place right now in terms of the quality of our food? I think we might be.
Yeah, but what you're forgetting, Lewis, is that cloning animals solves some problems, but it creates many. The cloned animals still need to eat. They still need to drink. They still need to consume resources. They still emit methane gas. So it would not impact the sustainability with regard to the environment to just start cloning animals. It would solve some problems, and it would make some other problems a lot worse.
Yeah, maybe we would break even. But as far as this China situation, it's going to have, someone needs to, experiment with this. It's going to happen somewhere.
And they claim that they'll also be able to maybe rescue some endangered species from the risk of extinction. And
right.
I feel like they're just throwing that in for PR value.
Probably, but if that is one of their goals, I say, let's give it a shot, right?
I really don't think that the future of the planet, sustainability-wise, is a heavy meat diet. Rather than figuring out how to raise even more meat and the food that those animals need to eat, I think we should be figuring out how to make meat a smaller part of our diet, more the Mediterranean diet, while making the meat that we do eat healthier. I think that really should be the goal and what we should be driving towards at this point, not figuring out how to raise even more cattle by cloning them at a very, very high rate. Palestinian poet Ashraf Fayyad was sentenced to death, not by ISIS, but by Saudi Arabia for renouncing Islam. Not only that, he denies even having renounced Islam anyway, but let's put that aside for the time being. Evidence being used against him includes poems from his collection called Instructions Within, which is totally banned in Saudi Arabia, as well as his Twitter posts and a conversation he had in a coffee shop in Abbas, which was said to be blasphemous. He has been given 30 days to appeal the sentence. In this way, Saudi Arabia is no different than ISIS for executing the poet, or sentencing to be executed the poet Ashraf Fayyad for leaving Islam. This is the great hypocrisy we have been talking about with you for many, many years. We're all shocked, right, by the Islamic State beheading people for moral and religious crimes that are, of course, completely ridiculous. But there are Islamic, so-called Islamic states that behead people as part of their justice system. And one of them is a huge American ally.
Yes, it seems that you don't have to do much to be executed over there, but they take pride in this. And it probably stems from some interpretation of their religious text.
Sure.
So
we need to understand Wahhabism in order to understand what's going on in Saudi Arabia and the religious text, of course.
Right. But yeah, they're an ally. We know why they're an ally. And maybe because of our current status quo and energy needs, it's important to remain an ally. But Dave, it kind of makes me feel a little sick to my stomach.
It absolutely is. And Saudi Arabia is not better than ISIS in this moral sense with regard to the beheadings for bogus religious crimes. They are, of course, different. Saudi Arabia is willing to engage in diplomacy. ISIS seems completely unwilling to enter into any diplomatic relationship with anyone. It fails to recognize borders, which even recognizing borders would be sort of a concession from ISIS. It is not the same as Saudi Arabia, but with regard to the beheadings for religious reasons, they certainly are no better. And the fact that they do it under the system of a legal system with courts and the whole thing, if a court sentences you to be beheaded or publicly killed or whatever for a so-called religious crime, it doesn't matter that a court did it. It's the same thing.
Yeah, and it's the same mentality. But what are you going to do? They're going to remain an ally, and as long as they are a stable country producing lots of oil, I think our government is going to keep going over there, shaking hands, bowing, and making nice.
Having oil and leaders that will kiss George W. Bush can bring you from the category of ISIS-like to the category of very, very friendly ally with the United States. That we know for sure. We have a voicemail number that is available to you 24 hours a day. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Yesterday, we were talking about who deserves the chance at rehabilitation and who deserves to be imprisoned for the rest of their lives. We talked about a serial rapist sentenced to 100 years, and the Eggman, who has done time in a federal facility, called in. Here's what he had to say.
Hey, Dave. I don't think the only goal of incarceration should be rehabilitation. I think that part of it should just be people that cannot live in society. It can be punitive, just straight up punishment. If somebody is convicted of multiple rapes, including that of a 15-year-old girl, they don't belong in society. If you think they can be rehabilitated, that can be debated. However, it hasn't been proven yet, so keep these people in prison forever. Dave, I was locked up for 30 months in federal prison. There are plenty of people in there that do not belong there. There are plenty of people in there that should never get out, ever.
All right.
Little
The
brother.
Eggman.
Hope you had a good holiday.
Had a good holiday. Hope you did too. On today's bonus show, a follow-up about stone troopers and clone troopers, a promising Li-Fi test, and I will tell a story of anti-Semitism that I was personally a witness to over the weekend. It was a crazy conversation I had with someone. You're not going to want to miss this story. DavidPakman.com/membership to sign up for the bonus show. If you want a free 2016 Hatriot Mail calendar with your membership, that's easy. Go to davidpakman.com/calendar16.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.